One of the first devices to successfully employ the principle essential to rocket flight was a wooden bird. The writings of Aulus Gellius, a Roman, tell a story of Greek named Arcessus, who lived in the state of Tarentum, now a part of southern Italy, somewhere around here. Arcessus mystified and amused the citizens of Tarentum by flying a pigeon made of wood. Escaping steam propelled the bird suspended on wires. The pigeon used the action-reaction principle, which was not stated as a scientific law until the 17th century. About 300 years after the pigeon, another Greek, hero of Alexandria, invented a similar rocket-like device called an aeolipile. It too used steam as a propulsive gas. The Chinese began experimenting with the gunpowder filled tubes. At some point, they attacked the bamboo tubes to arouse and launched them with bows. Soon, they discovered that these gunpowder tubes could launch themselves just by powder produced from the escaping gas. The true rocket was born. The date reporting the first use of the true rockets was in 1232. At this time, the Chinese and the Mongols were at war with each other. During the Battle of Keikang, the Chinese repelled the Mongol invaders by a barrage of arrows of flying fire. These fire arrows were a simple form of solid propellant rocket. A tube capped at one end contained gunpowder. The other end was left open and the tube was attached to long stick. When the powder was ignited, the rapid burning of the powder produced fire, smoke, and gas that escaped out of the open and produced a thrust. The stick acted as a simple guidance system that kept the rocket headed in the general direction as it flew through the air. It's not clear how effective these arrows of flying fire were as weapons of destruction, but their psychological effect on the Mongols must have been formidable. Following the Battle of the Keikang, the Mongols produced rockets of their own may have been responsible for the spread of rockets to Europe. Although the 13th to the 15th centuries, there were reports of many rocket experiments. In England, a monk named Roger Bacon worked on improved forms of gunpowder that greatly increased the range of rockets. In France, Jean Froissart found more accurate flights could be achieved by launching rockets through tubes. Froissart's idea was the forerunner of the modern bazooka. Jones da Fontana of Italy designed a surface-running rocket-powered torpedo for setting enemy ships on fire. By the 16th century, rockets fell into a time disuse as weapons of war, though they were still used for fireworks displays, and the German fireworks maker John Schmidtlab invented the step rocket, a multi-stage vehicle for lifting fireworks at higher altitudes. A large skyrocket first stage carried a smaller skyrocket second stage. When the larger rocket burned out, the smaller one continued at higher altitude before showering the sky with glowing cinders. Schmidtlab's idea is basic to all rockets today that go into outer. Nearly all uses of rockets at this time were for warfare or fireworks, but there is an interesting old Chinese legend that reported the use of rockets as a means of transportation. With the help of many assistants, a lesser-known Chinese official named one who assembled a rocket-powered flying chair. Attached to the chair were two large kits, and affixed to kits were 47 fire arrows rockets. On the day of the flight, one who sat himself on the chair and he gave the command to light the rockets. 47 rocket assistants, each armed with torches, rushed forward to light the fuses. In a moment there was a tremendous were accompanied by billowing clouds of smoke. When the smoke cleared, Wan Hu and his flying chair were gone. No one knows for sure what happened to Wan Hu, but it's probable that if the event really did take place, Wan Hu and his chair were blown to pieces. Fire arrows were as apt to explode as fly. Ottoman rocket. It was seen for the first time during the festivals organized for Kaya Sultan 1632-1633. Lagari Hasan Çelebi the rocket that they prepared with the 7 rocket prepared from gunpowder passed and took off when the fuel ran out thanks to the wings made of his own feathers. He made the descent to the sea without being damaged. Science is accepted as one of the most important events in the history of Turkish aviation. The statue of Lagari Hasan Çelebi is preserved in the Museum of Turkish Aeronautical Association. During the latter part of the 17th century, the scientific foundation for modern rocketry were laid by the great English scientist Sir Isaac Newton. Newton organized his understanding of physical motion into 3 scientific laws. The laws explain how rockets work and why they are able to work in the vacuum of outer space. Newton's laws soon began to have practical impact on the design of rockets. Rocket experiments in Germany and Russia began working with rockets with a mass more than 45 kilograms. Some of these rockets were so powerful that their escaping exhaust flames bored deep holes in the ground even before liftoff. During the end of the 18th century and early into 19th, rockets experienced a brief revival as a weapon of war. The success of Indian rockets barrages against in the British in 1792 and again in 1799 caught the interest of an artillery expert, Colonel William Congreve. Congreve set out to design rockets for the use by the British military. The devastating nature of war, rockets was not their accuracy or power, but their numbers. During a typical siege, thousands of them might be fired at the enemy. All over the world, rocket researchers experimented with ways to improve accuracy. An Englishman, William Hale, developed a technique called spin stabilization. In this method, the escaping exhaust gases struck small veins at the bottom of the rocket, causing it to spin much as a bullet does in flight. Variations of the principle are still used today. Rockets continued to be used with success in the battles all over the European continent. However, in a war with Prussia, the Austrian rocket brigades met their match against newly designed artillery pieces. Breech-loading cannon with the rifled barrels and exploding warheads were far more effective weapons of war than the best rockets. Once again, rockets were relegated to peacetime uses. In 1898, a Russian school teacher, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, proposed the idea of space exploration by rocket. In a report he published in 1903, Tsiolkovsky suggested the use of liquid propellants for rockets in order to achieve greater range. Tsiolkovsky stated that the speed and range of a rocket were limited only by the exhaust velocity of escaping gases. For his ideas, careful research and great vision, Tsiolkovsky has been called the father of modern astronautics. Early in the 20th century, an American, Robert Goddard, conducted practical experiments in rocketry. He had become interested in a wave of achieving higher altitudes than were possible for higher-than-air balloons. He published a pamphlet in 1990 entitled "The Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes." It was a mathematical analysis of what is today called the meteorological sounding rocket. Goddard's earliest experiments were with solid propellant rockets. In 1915, he began to try various types of solid fuels and to measure the exhaust velocity of the burning gases. While working on solid propellant rockets, Goddard became convinced that a rocket could be propelled better liquid fuel. No one had ever built a successful liquid propellant rocket before. It was a much more difficult task than building solid propellant rockets. Fuel and oxygen tanks, turbines, and combustion chambers would be needed. In spite of the difficulties, Goddard achieved the first successful flight with a liquid propellant rocket on March 16. Fueled by liquid oxygen and gasoline, the rocket flew for only 2.5 seconds, climbed 12.5 meters, and landed 56 meters away in the cabbage patch. By today's standards, the flight was unimpressive, but like the first powered airplane flight by the Wright brothers in 1903. Goddard's gasoline rocket was the forerunner of a whole new era in rocket flight. Goddard's experiments in liquid propellant rockets continued for many years. His rockets became bigger and flew higher. He developed a gyroscope system for flight control and payload compartment for scientific instruments. Parachute recovery systems were employed to return rockets and instruments safely. Goddard, for his achievements, has been called the father of modern rocketry. A third-grade space pioneer, Hermann Olbert, born on June 25, 1894 in Halmstad, Transylvania, and died on December 28, 1989 in Nuremberg, Germany, published a book in 1923 about rocket travel into outer space. His writings were important because of the many small rocket societies sprang up around the world. In Germany, the formation of one such society, the Freien für Raumfahrt Society for Space Travel, led to the development of the V-2 rocket, which was used against London during World War II. In 1937, German engineers and scientists, including Obert, assembled the Peenemünde on the shores of the Baltic Sea. There, the most advanced rocket of this time would be built and flown under the directorship of Wernher von Braun. The V-2 rocket in Germany, called the A4, was small by comparison to today's rockets. It achieved its great thrust by burning a mixture of liquid oxygen and alcohol at a rate of about 1 ton every 7 seconds. Once launched, the V-2 was a formidable weapon that could devastate whole city blocks. Fortunately for London and the Allied forces, the V-2 came too late in the war to change its outcome. Nevertheless, by war's end, German rocket scientists and engineers had already laid plans for advanced missiles capable of spanning the Atlantic Ocean and landing in the United States. These missiles would have had winged upper stages but very small payload capacities. With the fall of Germany, many unused V-2 rockets and components were captured by the Allies. Many German rocket scientists came to the United States, others went to the Soviet Union. The German scientists, including Wernher von Braun, were amazed at the progress Goddard had made. Both the United States and Soviet Union realized the potential of rocketry as military weapon and began a WWII experimental programs. At first, the United States began a program with high-altitude atmospheric-sounding rockets, one of Goddard's early ideas. Later, a variety of medium and long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles were developed. This became the starting point of the USA space program. Missiles such as the Redstone, Atlas, and Titan would eventually launch astronauts into space. On October 1957, the world was stunned by the news on Earth orbiting artificial satellite launched by Soviet Union. Called Sputnik 1, the satellite was the first successful entry in the race for space between the two superpower nations. Less than a month later, the Soviets followed the launch of the satellite carrying a dog named Laika on board. Laika survived in space for 7 days before being put to sleep before the oxygen supply ran out. A few months after the first Sputnik, the United States followed the Soviet Union with a satellite of its own. Explorer I was launched by the USA Army on January 31, 1958. In October of the year, the United States formally organized its space program by creating the National Aeronautics, the Space Administration, so NASA. NASA became a civilian agency with the goal peaceful exploration of space for the benefit of all humankind. Soon, many people and machines were being launched into space. Astronauts orbited Earth and landed the Moon. Robot spacecraft traveled to the planets. Space was suddenly opened up to exploration and commercial exploitation. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thanks for watching.